Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I am your host, Owl Medicine, and in today's episode, the topic that matters will be a continuation of last week. Last week, we talked about how emotions are logical, and this week, we're going to extend that to why that matters. We're going to talk about biological versus logical decisions. So in this podcast, we talk about life after trauma. Life burns us all eventually. Nobody can get away from it. Nobody rides for free. Some of us get it worse than others, but the reality is nobody rides for free. But those of us who are chronic stress adapted, that is to say those of us who had lots of stress early in our life, that's mostly the people who listen to this podcast. We have a special relationship with biological and logical decisions. And that relationship is based on our trauma. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about how nothing in biology can be understood except through the lens of evolution. We're going to talk about how emotions are biological decisions, a little bit that we covered last week. We're going to talk about biological versus logical decisions and the wisdom that lies in our biology. And this is really important for us because if we, as a people, as the traumatized ones, if we don't recognize that there is wisdom in our biological decisions and our knee-jerk reactions, we're screwed. To be frank, we're quite screwed. So, that's what we're going to cover today. I hope that you'll stick with me to the end of today's episode. So last week we talked about how emotions essentially are biological decisions. They're based off of and emergent with biological decisions. Essentially, what happens, we have our rational brain and our emotional brain. And this basic concept is everywhere in all types of spirituality and most recently in CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, and dialectic behavioral therapy. They both talk about the wise mind, where there is the emotional mind, the rational mind, and the wise mind. And the wise mind's job is to kind of herd the emotional mind and the rational mind together. The wise mind you could think of as the chariot driver, and the emotional and logical minds are the two horses pulling the chariot. One always wants to go right, and the other one always wants to go left. They both have the same job, pulling the chariot, but they have very different ideas as to how that should be done. It's the wise mind's job to be the mediator between the two. And so what that means is it's your job, you as a person, as the whole person, to be the mediator between your logical and your emotional mind. Your rational mind is on autopilot. Your emotional mind is on autopilot. That's why you can't stop emotions, and that's why you can't stop your brain unless you build a practice to do that. And that's why meditation is so great. But unless you do that, you're really going to struggle to get your emotional mind and your rational mind to line up, to agree with each other. And the reason is because one is making biological decisions while the other is making logical decisions. The biological decisions being made by the emotional mind give no shits as to how the rational mind conceptualizes an incident, and the rational mind gives no shits about how you feel about it. Unfortunately, both of them are inside you and working all of the time. They're always on behind the scenes, figuring out what is best for you. So it's your job to be the wise person. It's my job to be the wise person, to use our wise mind to get our emotional and rational brains under control. They're both on autopilot. The wise mind is not on autopilot. And the wise mind is actually kind of inefficient. It's inefficient compared to the logical mind and the rational mind because those are built-in biological processes. Those are on autopilot, and wisdom is not. Wisdom is not on autopilot in the human species. If that were the case, we would have a very different world than we live in now. So while your rational mind is busy doing stuff and your emotional mind is busy doing stuff, you, as the wise mind, it's your job to kind of watch the two, right? You watch the rational mind, who is always trying to negate emotions. They're negating the subjective realities. The rational mind is all about objective realities, while the emotional mind is all about our subjective realities, both of which are perfectly valid. And the reason it's so important for chronic stress adapted people to get used to feeling the difference between a logical and a biological decision is because trauma makes our decisions for us. Trauma gives us our biological decisions. Trauma informs our body as to which decisions to make in a threatening situation. If you have had enough threatening situations in your life, you will auto-react to certain stimuli, the stimuli that are very similar to the traumatic instances that you survived. That is a biological decision. What happens is you enter a situation and something about that situation is familiar. It's familiar to you. And you may not even register it as familiar. You might register it just as a room that you walked into. But there's a smell, or there's a type of carpet, or there's a print, or a couch. Something that reminds the subconscious parts of you, the emotional parts of you, the trauma-informed parts of you. Something in that room stimulates those memories, the parts of that memory that are not conscious. Maybe, if you're lucky, you get a conscious flicker of it and you're like, oh, and you get a flash of the room or whatever, and you're like, oh, all right, I see what's happening. If you're tuned into your subconscious and you're tuned into what's happening in your body when you walk into that room, if something is familiar, you will recognize that familiarity in your body. There will be a somatic response. There will be a loosening, a relaxing, or a tensing. There will be some kind of physiological response that informs you that this is a familiar place. And if it's a trauma-related familiarity, it's going to be an intensity that you feel. What you do with that intensity is dependent upon which strategies you launched as a kid when you started to feel threatened as a child. If you fawned and tried to please everyone in the room, then that will be your default, and your biological decision will be to do that. And if that is an appropriate response for the situation, you're totally fine. Who cares? Move on. The problem for a lot of us is that our biological responses are not appropriate for the situation that we're in. If we are really not tuned in to our own subconscious and into our body, because that's how you access the subconscious, is through your somatic experiences and through watching your own behaviors and habits and finding the patterns in it and tracing that pattern backwards. But the originating place is always somatic. It's always in your body. So for us, CSA people, if we don't deeply feel into our physical experiences, into our somatic experiences, we are not able to catch what our subconscious is catching for us. And that's why we can get ourselves into trouble. Our body is making biological decisions based on the decisions that we had made in the past when we are stress triggered. Now, I said earlier, nothing in biology can be understood except through the lens of evolution. And what that means exactly is that when it comes to understanding how our body works, we have to look at where we came from evolutionarily. We have to look at what our grandparents dealt with, and great-great-grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents, and the monkeys that came before them. And when we do this, and we think about their life and what they had to do to survive, suddenly our innate mechanisms make all the sense in the world. The innate mechanisms that are in effect are our rational and our emotional minds. The rational mind was created by evolution, like I mentioned last week, to basically be able to create a fake version of you, to then run that version of you through an idea. You're like, hey, I could climb that tree and go get that coconut, but that's a really tall tree, and it looks like it's fitting to fall. And so then you make up a fake version of you, and you imagine yourself going up into the tree, and you think about what would happen once you get up there, and then you can make that decision, and then fake you dies instead of the real you. Right? So that's the innate mechanism for the rational brain, whereas the innate mechanism for the emotional brain is reflex. Emotions are reflexes. And that's the thing we got to really get clear, is emotions are reflexes. In fact, there's a whole hypothesis called the cognitive reflex hypothesis. That's basically saying the exact same thing that I'm saying. There's a wisdom in our biology. Our biology does amazing things every moment that we're alive. And really incredible things that you don't have to pay any attention to. Right? You don't have to pay attention to if your heart is beating. You don't have to pay attention to if you're breathing. You can if you want, but you don't have to. You don't have to even be conscious for your kidneys to filter your waste. You don't have to be conscious for your liver to filter your blood. You don't have to worry about that. Those are things that happen automatically by your body, naturally. We trust those processes. We trust that our body will do what it needs to do to maintain homeostasis, to maintain its balance, which relative balance and harmony within an organism could be described as health. And that's our goal, is to live healthy, right? I feel like we can live much healthier if we truly admit the wisdom in our biology. I know that it gets us in trouble quite often, sometimes, and frankly, the older we get, the less often it gets us in trouble, right? It's like in our 20s and 30s, it gets us into the most trouble, especially our 20s, because we only have biological decisions. I've said so many times that I don't think any of us make a decision until 30, and now I think that might be 35. And the reason I say that is, partially our prefrontal cortex isn't developed until our 30s. We used to think it was 25, now it's 30s, up to 34, I've even found. So I'm not sure that we make many rational decisions for the first 30 years of our life, if any. But we do make a lot of decisions that keep us alive, right? No matter how many terrible decisions that you made, and I know I definitely made, somehow I'm still alive. So even though they were many times irrational, I'm alive, right? So are you. I'm sure if you're listening to me, you probably did some dumb shit in your life. You probably did some dumb stuff. And I mean, frankly, that just means that you lived, as far as I'm concerned. But those dumb decisions, you're still alive, you know? They're not evil. A bad decision is not an evil thing. And sometimes it feels like it. Sometimes it feels like making the wrong decision is just evil. It's unacceptable, at least. I think part of that is the training that we get in school all through childhood of only raise your hand if you know the answer. When you get called on, if you don't know the answer, then you get laughed at or called an idiot. I mean, even just once is all it takes for something like that to sting so deeply you never do it again. And then you have this experience. You're left with this experience of wanting to try your answer and say, hey, I might be right. And then your might be right caused ridicule and exclusion and exile. And so now we think that we have to be right all of the time. And if we're not right, then we're an idiot. That's the only option. If we're not right, we're an idiot. And I really want to get that out of all of our heads, out of mine too. I've been rewatching House lately, and I freaking love House. I love that show. It's such a good show. I used to want to be House. I really did. And rewatching it, oh my God. Rewatching it's interesting for my ego because I really manifested so much of him I was that person. I was just a total asshole, really good at my job, gave no shits about anybody's feelings and nothing. And now the character that I really love, I don't even know if y'all are going to remember him, but there was a psychiatrist that winds up treating House, a big old black dude that just gets him, man. And rewatching it, it's really cool because I used to want to be House, and now I really want to be that guy. And the difference between the two is that guy doesn't discount anything. He doesn't discount the emotions or the rationality. It's incredible. And he's so smart because he calls House out multiple times in ways that he just makes him really mad because House is used to being the smartest guy in the room. And unfortunately, he's just not this time. That really sucks for him. But the reason the guy is so incredible is because he is able to see what House is doing, calculate for it, not let his emotions get tied into it, and not let his emotions deny any of it either. It's a really powerful ability to be able to watch and validate one's own rational and emotional experiences. And I think that's what we all need to do. I think that's what we all have to do if we're really going to grow. And we grow out of it, right? Like if you don't set a calendar to try to make all of it better, and you don't like hire a coach and build a whole program around it, you're still going to get better at making logical decisions instead of biological decisions. Because as you get older, you've had more experiences, and experiences are what inform biological choices. Experiences are what inform biological choices. I want to say it one more time. Experiences are what inform our biological choices. So if you want to make different choices, if there is an area of your life where you always wind up getting upset and acting in a way that you aren't proud of, maybe you don't even get upset. Maybe there's just this one part of your life, whether it's at work or at home with one child or all your children or one specific person at work or a family member or an ex. If there is one part of your life that you just keep wishing you did better at, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do two things, two very simple things that will help a lot. The first one is when you walk in the door, Say your issue is with your family, and we all just had Thanksgiving, and Christmas is coming up. So we're all going to be around the family. So say your family is a trigger for you. Go figure. And there's just something about the way that you respond when you're with them that you aren't proud of. Whether you get mean or whether you get quiet or whatever it is, there's something about it that you're not proud of and you want to change that. Experiences are what inform our biology. So you can rationally run yourself through it 1,000 times, and that will help. It'll help some, but it's not going to help all that much. What is going to help is actually going in. So now you don't want to go in blind, right? So this is where your wise mind kicks in. This is where being wise kicks in, right? If we're using our wise mind, we are being wise. So we use our rational brain to plan ahead because we know that we get triggered, and we know that because we've watched our patterns, because patterns are one of the ways that we come to understand our subconscious. We've watched our patterns, and now we know that going home always screws us up, and we act in a way that we don't like. But the experience is what's going to change us. So when you walk through that door, you've planned ahead a little bit. What you're going to do is when you walk through, I want you to visualize what's behind you from the door frame in. As you walk through the house, I want you to be 100% aware, without looking at it, as to what's above and behind you. I want you to be aware of the shape of the room the whole time that you're in it. And when you lose track of it, figure it out again. Just sit there and be like, okay, this is the shape I'm in, and really focus on the points above and behind you. For some reason, focusing on the point above and behind me is really, really helpful for knowing my context. I mean, I love, the reason I'm a coach is because I love one-on-one stuff. My one-on-one everything is the best way. Getting in deep with somebody is my favorite thing. The whole world disappears. But then it's just you and them. And when we're struggling to maintain a certain type of behavior in a certain type of context, when we do that, we lose all sense of context because it's just you and them. And I love doing that, but I lose my context. Keeping an eye on the back of the room, above and behind me, is a marvelous way, that I found anyway, to keep myself in context, to really in context, because somehow it helps me know what day of the week it is and about what time it is. And something about that lets me know that time is still marching on, and whatever I'm experiencing is not forever. And that's deeply, deeply satisfying and comforting to me, because I can do anything for a short while. I can do anything for a couple of hours, you know. I believe that in myself. It's a mantra I've told myself to get myself through the hard times quite a few times. And it works. It's true. I can get myself through anything. So do that as step one. And then the second part of what I want you to do when you walk into a room that you know is going to be a challenge for you, I want you to, as best you can, try to feel your heartbeat. I want you to sit. I mean, you can do this right now. It takes a little practice, but try to feel your heartbeat. Feeling your heartbeat, the ability to feel your heartbeat and know about how many beats a minute is, it seems like a silly thing, but turns out it's actually a really good measure for our own interoception. It's not just proprioception. We only have 2 words to describe the inside of our bodies, which is insane to me. But we have interoception and proprioception, which is a type of interoception. So intero meaning inside, ception meaning a sense. Interoception is how we feel on the inside. When you notice that you start to feel angry, you notice that because of your interoception, because of your ability to look inside yourself. So that's what I want you to do, is try to look inside yourself and see if you can feel your heartbeat. Just do those two things. And when somebody like talks to you and asks this, that, and the other, then engage and do whatever you need to do. And then when you get a break from talking to folks, from doing whatever it is that you feel you need to do, sit back down or walk back to the entrance of the room and then walk to wherever it is that you need to go. Picture the whole room and try to count your heartbeat. That's going to make sure that you know where you are. That's the context. That's the looking at the room. And that's going to let you know how you are. So this lets you know both where and how you are in this moment in time. If you're aware of where you are in this moment in time and how you are feeling inside in this moment in time, the chances of you making a biological decision are very low. The chances of you snapping at somebody or bursting into tears or running out of the room is much lower because you know where you are and you know how you feel. So when you start to get ramped up, when you start to feel on edge, when you start to feel bothered that racist Uncle Tommy is running his mouth again, you can watch your own heart rate. And you can do whatever you want with Uncle Tommy. I'm not here to tell you how to do that, live your life, and talk to folks and that kind of shit. I'm just here to try to help make your life a little bit more tolerable after trauma. So do with Uncle Tommy however you want. But if you're able to watch your heart rate while you're dealing with Uncle Tommy and maintain your cognitive knowledge of where you are in the room, right? Because that's what we're doing. It's the cognitive knowledge of where you are in the room, and it's the interoception allowing you to know how you feel. So you know where you are mentally, and you know how you feel emotionally. If you're able to do that, guess who's being wise? You! Sorry, I'm old. That was a Crank the Soldier Boy thing. You're being wise. You really are. You're being wise. If you're able to do that, you are blending in every moment that you're doing this, where you're attempting to feel your heart rate and keeping cognizant of where you are in the room and the shape of the room. You are working your emotional and your mental muscles at the same time. That is a very wise thing to do, because the more they work together, the better they get along. They both have the same goal. They're chariot horses. They're trying to pull the chariot, your meat sack, through life without you dying. That's their job. But one wants to go left, the other one wants to go right. This is a really simple strategy for you to be able to take the right horse and the left horse and try to make them both go straight. Because essentially, those horses cause us to make biological or logical decisions. And if we can make a decision that both encompasses our biological and logical desires, that recognizes the sanctity, the truth, and the importance of both our rational and emotional states and desires, that is a wise decision. It's really important for us trauma folks to do this. So in doing research for the book, I wanted to find out what everybody was saying as to what we should do for people with lots of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. So I was starting a lot of this based on the ACE study and the resiliency questionnaire that came out after, but largely on the ACEs, because adverse childhood experiences are what give us lots and lots of our trauma. Of course, you can be traumatized later. Bad stuff can happen any time, any place through life, but we are the most susceptible during childhood. So I wanted to see what the experts were saying to do for us, for the people who have survived childhood trauma. Do you know what they said? Every single one of them. Like the leader of all of it is the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. They are the world's leading authority. And they had a 6-point bulleted instruction set. And The number one thing that they talked about was early intervention, and the next was legislation. And all 6 of the bullet points were about early intervention and legislation. I'm like, okay, those are great. Early intervention, stop the trauma from happening. Legislation, we understand that a lot of the trauma comes from social stuff, and socioeconomic class has a huge factor in it, those sorts of things. So, hell yeah, do all of those. But what about us? What about me? I'm tired of being left behind, man. I really am. I'm tired of being left behind. And this Harvard Center for the Developing Child is basically doing the same thing. They're leaving us behind. And the reason is because they haven't found any good ways to undo the trauma of childhood and adverse childhood experiences. They haven't found a reliable way to deal with it. And my question to them is, who is intervening? Early intervention is fantastic. Absolute best, top of the line, great. Let's just not hurt anyone ever again. Sounds lovely. But if early intervention is the best step, who is intervening? Everybody else, just a normal person is intervening. But what we found out about normal people are still very traumatized. Our culture is a traumatic culture. The things that we were designed biologically to experience, we no longer experience thanks to our culture. And I mean this in many, many, many ways, from birth to child rearing to school to the family unit, so many ways. It's all changed. So if the only people that are intervening are also damaged, are also chronic stress adapted, kids are always picking up whatever other people are doing through modeling. Guess what they're going to pick up? Being chronic stress adapted. They won't have any other option. They're just going to pick up exactly what it is that you put down. There's no other option. That's why it's so important to ask this question. Who is intervening? Because if we're intervening and we haven't dealt with our trauma, and frankly, none of us have dealt with all of it. I've dedicated my life to doing it, and I still feel nipple deep half the time. So what are we going to do? We don't give up on us. That's the answer. And the way that we don't give up on ourselves is to make biological decisions logical ones. We have to be able to make decisions that make sense. And the way that we do that is by putting ourselves into challenging situations, by walking into the room and practicing a mental exercise and an emotional exercise. Did you know that counting your heart rate was an emotional exercise? It is. Don't mean to trick you, but it is. Keeping track of your heart rate, just counting your heart, is actually an emotional exercise because it allows you to catch your emotions early on. So when you walk into that room, you're practicing being wise. And then you have the experience of being wise in a challenging environment. So guess what happens next time? The biological decision is just that much easier to override. And that's the process, baby. That's the whole damn thing. If we want to heal ourselves from our trauma and from like the crap that we do, which is really just saying there are certain behaviors that are automated that we wish we had a little more control of, by tapping more into your body, what's happening inside your body, you can find those things and you can sense them early and you can eliminate issues before they arise. It's really amazing. It's really powerful and it's really wonderful. And that's how we make biological decisions become logical ones. And I'm not trying to, please don't misunderstand me. I think I've made it clear with the wise mind thing. The decisions that we're trying to make, they're wise because they are informed both by our logical and our biological minds, our rational and our emotional minds. There's so many names under in so many different lenses. But that's how we do it. if we're actually going to make the world a better place for our children, the way the Harvard Center for the Developing Child says that we should and that we all want, if we're actually going to make the world better for our children, we have to make ourselves better. And it's really not that hard. You're good enough that you kept yourself alive. Your bad biological decisions, the worst ones that you ever made, still didn't end with you being dead. It could have, but ultimately you're still here. So long as you were on this side of the dirt, there is more right with you than there is wrong. So don't get hung up on being broken. Don't hung up on being busted or being irrational or being emotional or being any of that shit, because your emotions are just as logical. The hard part is trying to understand that the life that you have had is fucking irrational. The life that I have had is fucking irrational. And that's the reason my emotions make irrational decisions for me, is because even though they are irrational, they are biological. They may not make sense to my rational brain, but they are biological decisions, and they're just repeating the same ones that have saved my ass 1,000 times. And it gets easier as we get older because we've had more experiences. And I mean, even if you don't do it on purpose, most people try to not let themselves get too riled up by uncle because it doesn't feel good. Right? Just that is enough to make us, over time, slowly change our reactions to things. The hard part is we have kids young. Most people, and the younger you have your children, the healthier they are, up to a point, obviously. But young mothers and young fathers have typically the healthiest babies. They also have the most unhealthy, emotional responses to things. They're the ones with the most biological decisions being made. So it's a hard spot. That's why we gotta obliterate the nuclear family and spend as much time with kids and other people's kids as we can, because it takes way more than 1 or 2 people to raise a child. Way, 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 way more. Especially in the culture that we have now, it takes so much to raise a healthy child, because being well-adjusted and healthy in an unhealthy society is almost impossible, especially when you have to socialize to function in it. But the way that we do that is by making biological decisions become logical ones. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for hanging out with me for another episode of the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked it and want to donate, all the links are below. If you want to schedule a coaching session with me, you can set up a free 15-minute accountability call at owlchrysalismedicine.com. Again, that is OWLCHRYSALIS medicine, exactly how it sounds, medicine.com. Hit me up. Thank you guys for joining me. And remember, stay curious and stay uncomfortable.